Welcome back to the upstairs toilet is leaking. A show from the void. Welcome back to Rainbows and Razor Blades, a show from the void. By the Gregorian calendar, it is currently the 24th day of the third month, the month of March in the year of the Lord, 2022. By the French Revolutionary calendar, it is currently early, the first week, in the month of Germinal, the month of seed, and also spring. Today we have a pretty specific topic order, actually. I don't usually get this focused on my topics, but today we're going to talk about sociopaths, which is kind of cliche, a little bit played out, a little trite, but I think it's important because I do have a lot to say on the matter. So we'll start off by just giving some disclaimers. Warning: the following program should not be used for political or academic purposes and should be considered psychotic and entirely fictional. The themes and opinions expressed in this program may not necessarily be the beliefs of those featured on this program. Ow. This program may contain graphic and disturbing content, dark humor that may be distressing and triggering for some viewers, and against the terms of service for some mainstream websites. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Sociopaths. What are they? What aren't they? What are they in relation to things that are similar, and how do we differentiate between the categories of different labels, we'll say, that you can put on somebody? So I'm just gonna Google it because I think that that's gonna be the most responsible way for me to give you a clinical diagnosis, or I'm not sorry, that's another important disclaimer, actually. Dr. Daddy Todd Grande always starts off with, like, just a reminder, we are not diagnosing anyone in this video. And that's really important because I am not a mental health clinician. I am not clinically trained, and none of this should be considered either medical advice or clinical advice, because I'm literally just some person with a pink hat. Like, that's my qualification. Like, you're watching my video, but that doesn't mean that you should inherently listen to me. But I do have some things to talk about when it comes to sociopaths, because I've encountered that type of malevolent person, and I think most people have. So a sociopath is we'll say, non-clinical term, because the clinical term, as I've looked it up, is antisocial personality disorder, which can also sometimes be labeled with conduct disorder. So an antisocial person, it's interesting because it doesn't actually mean something the way that, say, like, schizophrenia means something, like maybe bipolar, like, it means something. Whereas antisocial personality disorder, it isn't that it doesn't mean something, it's that the thing that it means can't necessarily be, like, medicated for or corrected for. A sociopath is somebody who gets into your life like a vampire, and there's many different tactics that they can use against you maliciously, and will do so. The imposter from Among Us is an analogy that I'm going to keep returning to, because a lot of the time within friendship groups, that is how they behave. Whether they elevate to the point of murder, that's kind of dependent, but you won't find many murderers. You will find some, but you won't find many of them that don't have at least some severe mental problems. And we'll just leave it at that. And a lot of the time, those problems are not something to the effect of, like, a true psychotic episode where, like, you cut someone's head off and start eating its ear on, like, a tour bus. Right? Like, that's a real story. Someone really did that. And it wasn't because that person was antisocial. It was probably a factor. But it was because they were psychotic. Whereas a sociopath is someone who doesn't necessarily have to be completely cognizant or lucid about it, but they play games. And we'll elaborate on what that is in a moment. But I'm going to give you the clinical definition of antisocial personality disorder. So those with ASPD have no regard for others' rights or feelings, lack empathy or remorse for wrongdoings, and have need to exploit and manipulate others for personal gain. Nature and nurture play a role in antisocial personality disorder. The reasons behind the disorder are not fully understood. Now, that's from WebMD. Okay? And then, so here's just from Google. It says symptoms requires a medical diagnosis. Those with antisocial personality disorder tend to lie, break laws, act impulsively, and lack regard for their own safety or safety of others. Symptoms may lessen with age. And then here's another thing. It says overview. A mental health disorder characterized by disregard for other people. Those with antisocial personality disorder may begin to show symptoms in childhood, but the condition can't be diagnosed until adolescence or adulthood. A lot of the time they'll label them young if they start being real violent, those types. They'll label them with a conduct disorder. So a sociopath is not not so much a clinical term, so much as just it's a type of person, right? People spend a lot of the time trying to differentiate between like a psychopath or a sociopath, and I'm not going to spend time delineating between those two. I don't think it's really relevant, but what I'm going to talk about are people, and this is, as it said, people who don't care about other people. Or they have a fundamental lack of regard for society, for rules, for anything that does not give them what they need and what they want and their sense of control and power. Like, that is the defining modus operandi of a sociopath. So let me tell you a story about how I have encountered in my life two people that I would say with almost certainty, confirm are antisocials. And interestingly enough, of the thousands, and I mean this, thousands of people I've encountered, truly it has been only those two. Now, what's interesting about sociopaths is the intelligent ones, right? The ones who are stupid, they burn out. A lot of them become bums on the street, alcoholics, whatever. They end up in prisons, whatever. We're talking about the ones that are like covert, right? The way that like a covert narcissist can sneak into your friend group and all of a sudden be like, I'm the greatest fucking thing ever. Whereas a sociopath isn't going to be like, I'm the greatest thing ever. They're just going to manipulate you. They'll tell you, well, you're the greatest thing ever. And then when they need something from you, if you don't give them what they need or want, then you're a piece of shit. Then why aren't you helping me? I gave you all these things. I gave you all these gifts. I enmeshed myself into your friendship group. I've ingratiated myself by process of flattery. You know, why aren't you giving me what I need? I'm going to gaslight you, make you think you're the problem, or more importantly, they will play with your feelings and they will make you feel as though you are the problem. Now I'm gonna back up a bit. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna back up there a little bit. Ingratiation. I think it probably, I'm not an epistemologist or whatever the word is. I don't know the root origin of the word, but the root of it, I think, is like gracious, like ingratiate. It's to become close with somebody or to make yourself more flattered within their life than you would have otherwise been. A common tactic that sociopaths and manipulative people in general, which is a better way to kind of characterize, I think, what I'm speaking about, is malicious gift giving, and you don't know that it's malicious, right? Like, you get a weird feeling about it, right? Like, it's the new boyfriend who gives you a car. You're like, wow, I really needed this car to get to work. But here's the thing. The moment you start talking to other guys, or God forbid, trying to fuck other guys, and they're sexually attached to you, then all of the bets are off, and now they'll break your things, they'll hurt you any way that they can, they'll try to get in with your family to make your family against you. You know, they do these weird things, all because of the car, right? That's what they'll say. They'll be like, well, it's because of the car that I gave you, which gave them power over you because they've given you a gift. Maybe they'll give you just smaller gifts. Weed, for example, drugs, anything that you want, they are too eager to provide a need to you. And what this can do is it can form a process of enmeshment. And enmeshment is where two or more people, but generally I'm going to speak about it as if it's two and it's either like a couple. It can even be a parent to child, but it's where your ability to free think and free behave and have autonomy becomes codependent to or interlinked with and thereby enmeshed, as in it's together with that other person, to the point where it's inseparable and they become one entity. Here's an example, and this is not exclusive. Like, it isn't like only this, right? The boyfriend answers the phone and says, sorry, Danielle cannot come to the phone. Danielle's a random name, by the way. Danielle cannot come to the phone right now. She's sick again. It's like, is she sick or did you beat her last night? Or is she crying because you've emotionally abused her for the last 36 hours straight because you went on a bender and fucked some other girl and she's butthurt about it and you've been gaslighting her, etc., etc., etc. But nobody else sees that because they don't know that you're a sociopath. They may have suspicions and they may be probing to make sure that their friend is safe. And that's when the sociopath, through process of enmeshment, will create a situation where they are insulated from the blowback that others surrounding their target of fixation, if they have one, it insulates them from responsibility. So those two words, ingratiate, is a big red flag. When someone starts to ingratiate themselves, it isn't just necessarily that they're a sociopath. I mean, they could be like a brown noser or a kiss ass or even a journalist or the FBI. There's many reasons why people would do those types of manipulative tactical behaviors. But a sociopath, someone who has no regard for your feelings, is doing it as if it's a game of Magic the Gathering. They're placing land, right? Like turn 1, land drop. You don't even know you're playing Magic the Gathering. You may not even know how Magic the Gathering works or that the game could be getting played. And all of a sudden, it's turn 5, and they're tapping their lands to start dropping things on your field that you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What is happening here? Like, what is happening here? So I'm going to tell you a personal story about a sociopath who I encountered when I was 19 years old. When I was 19, I was just getting in with the drug crowd, we'll call it. The psychedelic crowd, actually. And this was when I was kind of a fool, and I didn't really know how to differentiate between people who had my best interests at heart and people who were just trying to impress me because they realized that I was a tool to them. Because I was smart, I was capable, and I could get them drugs. And this isn't something that I do casually, especially anymore. I mean, I'm 30. I'm speaking about things I did over a decade ago. So, statute of limitation, all that. But as the story goes, I could at that time, I had a connection for LSD. And, I was not shy about it. But I met this person at a party, and he told me something that I found to be really endearing. And that was that he had been friends with my brother for a long time, and that those two go way back and they're good friends. Now, it turned out, and I didn't know this because my brother was out of the country at the time, and I couldn't speak to him because he was overseas. It turned out that my brother fucking hated this kid, and it had nothing but, like, warnings. Like, no, you gotta stay away from that guy, he's a whack job. But I didn't know that because this person had ingratiated themselves into my life. And then it escalated to the point where he would bully me. He would just outright insult me in front of his friends. He would call me his dad, like, because I would provide things for him, because he would coerce me into doing it, right? He would owe me. He created a situation where he owed me money by saying, like, I'm going to get you what you asked for and what you need, but you have to pay me first. And I was a dumb kid. I didn't know any better. So I gave him like $200, right? Like, you're going to get me, what I want with drugs, and, it'll work out. Turns out that he just straight up stole my money. Like, there was never an intention at all to do anything but steal my money for his heroin, and his cocaine, which I wasn't even trying to get. He was just an addict. I didn't know that. I was an idiot. I didn't realize how a sociopath operated back then. And, the last straw was where he needed a ride and said, like, I got your money. I just went to the bank, yada, yada. So I show up. I say, where's my money? He goes, oh, we got to go to the bank. I say, okay. So we go to the bank. Turns out the bank is the mall, and that his friend that we now had to pick up isn't actually his friend. It's a literal hooker from Craigslist, and I'm not making this up, right? And then the hooker stole my fucking money and then disappeared into the hospital. I was like, what's happening in my life right now? Truly, like, what is actually happening? And what is happening is the evolution of what a sociopath does to you. Because it starts off subtle. It starts off as a friendship. It actually usually starts off as a best friendship. Because they're very eager to give you what you need. They're very easily, it's very easy for them to recognize what it is about a different person that can pull their strings, right? They see strings that other people may not even be looking for because they're looking for them. They're feeling you out. They're trying to see if you're vulnerable, and they're trying to see how that they can use you as a tool. because they have no regard for you, your safety, your friend's safety, your emotional sovereignty, none of it. The second sociopath, I think, well, there's been a few in between that I just kind of like, I recognized it and was like, nah. The last sociopath was more recent, and it was my current partner's ex-girlfriend. And at the time, my current partner, who I'm not going to speak about, and I'm not going to name these people, had invited someone who I can't clinically diagnose them as a sociopath. I don't know. I just know that they had enough red flags that I'm making this video, right? And it isn't to cancel them. I'm not going to dox them or give any information. But they behaved like my friend's ex-husband in a custody battle. And they tried to manipulate me into a situation where they were like, well, we're all three of us in a polyamorous relationship, and you now have to do all these things. And I'm like, wow, that's delusional. That's about as delusional a thing as I could imagine. And it didn't come out of nowhere, right? Because they had ingratiated themselves and enmeshed themselves into my friendship circle because it gave them power over me and over the person that they are fixated on. And which was not really me, is the other person. So by allowing them into my friendship group, what happened is that they got close to, or tried to get close to, everyone that I'm close with. It didn't really end up working out for them so well because I am an adult. These are not children that I'm hanging out with. These are like 25 to 30-year-olds. And I keep people who are stable-minded. And so they thought it was a little weird. Some of them were nice at first, and then they didn't really know how to wind that back. Like, hey, listen, like, I'm trying to form a partnership with this other person. Can you please stop trying to always go on like triple dates with us or like touch us when we dance? But unfortunately, my friends, those two friends, were not really, they weren't strong enough. And I don't mean to imply that they were weak. They were inexperienced. They were too inexperienced to be able to verbalize their discomfort. Because, like many of my generation, were too scared to be a burden. And they just didn't want to be perceived as a burden. They didn't want to be cast out from the group because the fear of humiliation, the fear of being chastised, often overpowers people's honest perceptions of other people. Because I also had bad vibes about this person up front. I thought they were a little strange. But I was like, you know what, it's fine, because like my partner thinks they're okay. They've been okay for years, which was actually even more of a red flag. And who am I to judge? I'll let it slide, these little weird things that they're doing, little tiny weird things that they're saying, the ways that they're saying it, the weird like tone inflections. There's an interesting thing about sociopaths where they'll do this thing, it's called tone switching, where if they're fucking screaming at you and it's not fucking working, I'm so sorry I screamed at you, baby. Listen, I lost my temper. I'm so sorry. I get a little bit like this myself, actually, and that I think is a result of trauma, but I don't do it to manipulate people that I know of. I don't think so. I think I'm a little too self-reflective, and I'm also not a sociopath that I know of. They do another thing where they will use your vulnerabilities against you. If they know you have trauma, they'll bring up your trauma and then be like, I'm so sorry that you're having like a traumatic experience right now. It must be so triggering for you. Which is just, it's malicious. It's pure malice, right? It's malevolent. And when you encounter that type of evil, you don't necessarily recognize it immediately, right? Because the imposters from among us don't rip their mask off and tell you they're the imposter. The crew has to vote together to vote them out. And it's difficult because a lot of the time the crew members have been co-opted over the different turns of meeting. And that's the game that sociopaths are playing. The same game as Among Us. Because they're the fucking imposter. Whether they know it or not, whether the imposter knows that they're the imposter is irrelevant. All that matters is your crew. Figuring out who your crew is more important than figuring out who the imposter is. If you can figure out who your crew is, then when someone comes in as an imposter, you can get rid of them. And so that's my big takeaway and my biggest advice to weed sociopaths out of your life is make sure you have good crew. Make sure that your friends are on board. Make sure that you speak to your friends about your discomforts. Don't just sit on things that you think like may not be important. Like if it makes you insecure or you think that you could be judged for it, express that. Be like, listen, I'm feeling a little vulnerable or insecure. Like maybe this is just kind of something I invented, but like I feel like when they said this thing to you, or they brought like really expensive weed to the house to smoke together. Like that seemed like a little weird, right? Like it seems like they're trying to like maybe like get in with us a little bit more than they maybe should get in with us. Like it seemed like when they crossed a boundary and went and committed like petty vandalism to like just destroy this like annoying blinking light that you didn't like, and they went and they like broke the light in the middle of the night. That's vandalism. Like it's a little bit bizarre. Like it solved the problem because again they're very eager to fill a need in your life, but it's weird, right? Now these are all very like non-specific examples, and I'm changing details because I don't mean to dox people and I don't want to cause stir drama. It isn't my place to. But there was definitely some very bizarre behaviors with this person. And it came to a head when they basically tried to triangulate me. And they would do this thing that sociopaths very often do, where they speak for other people. Well, me and your partner, the pine cone. I'm gonna go get my partner. I'm gonna show you. Well, both me and Pinecone both think you're a bitch. I'm like, Pinecone, do you think I'm a bitch? They're like, why would I think that? It's like, well, it's just a little weird. The sociopath, who I don't yet know is a sociopath, the imposter from Among Us, just said that you said this thing about me. And I thought it was a little weird. Did you really say that? They're like, no. Right? And it isn't always as basic as insults. Sometimes it's passive aggressiveness. Sometimes it's to the effect of like, well, they made mistakes. The Pinecone made mistakes, not me. The Pinecone, they try to reinvent and recontextualize history, also known as gaslighting and what's the other word for it? Historical revisionism. Same thing the Nazis do, not to accuse any sociopaths of being Nazis, or this person that I'm speaking about of being a Nazi. I don't think that's the case, but it's the same type of behavior. And over time, those patterns can become evident. And when you recognize for them, it's important to realize what's happening. There's also the case of borderline personalities, there's sociopaths, there's schizotypals. That's a different thing entirely, but it can cause like sometimes the similar deranged type of delusional behavior. Sociopaths aren't necessarily delusional, but what's interesting about a sociopath is they will often use their mental illness as a smokescreen. Like, well, I just didn't know any better. I'm a little bit mentally ill. Like I'm just a little bit delusional, Or they'll try to walk back if they get caught. Like, hey, you're the imposter. We're about to vote you out. They're like, no, really, I'm crew. Don't vote me off the spaceship. I'm crew. But sometimes I say dumb things, right? Like sometimes I can be a bit of a bitch. It was just a mood swing. They'll try to make excuses. They'll do anything they can to try to deflect and not take responsibility for in a similar capacity to a narcissist. A narcissist's main mode of operation is to never take responsibility for fucking anything. Ever. Ever. They will only take credit for something if it makes them look good, because they only care about themselves. Whereas a sociopath, they will use every emotional advantage that they can. If it means taking responsibility for something that they didn't even have anything to do with, if they think it gives them control over you, they'll do it. They'll be like, I'll tell the police it was my weed since we got pulled over. Like, wow, thanks, you'd really do that for me? Oh yes, I'd really do that for you. Because in 6 months, I'm going to try to throw you to the wolves and tell the cops you did something else. Right? So that I don't have to get caught. And then they'll try to twist your arm into saying that you did it. Right? This often happens in like drug circles, like people who are like meth heads, like addicts, anyone who has run-ins with the law, which the person I'm speaking about vaguely, to my knowledge, doesn't have issues with. Where you also find a lot of sociopaths? Custody battles. Your ex-husband who's trying to get with your kids and try to dictate to you the way that you can or cannot talk to your like new husband, for example, that's a sociopath. Sometimes you can have a narcissistic sociopath. Because why not? They're just it isn't a thing, right? It's not a thing, it's a way of being. Right? The same way that you can kind of notice who a vegan is by asking them like, wow, like you really do all these peaceful things. Like you're a Buddhist, you're a vegan. Like the same thing that like that's not a personality disorder. That's like a lifestyle. Being a sociopath is kind of a lifestyle, and it may or may not be a choice. It may be that it is a choice, and they just have a fundamental disregard for others, hence the clinical diagnostic part of antisocial personality disorder. But it may also just be that they choose to play a game. Because again, Magic the Gathering as an example, like it's turn 4 of Magic the Gathering, and you just realize that they're playing against you, right? This whole time that they've been like tapping lands and doing things, it hasn't been to do anything but ingratiate, enmesh, impress, ultimately to take advantage, coerce, gaslight. It's not good. And if you don't have your crew in order, yeah, you're gonna be fucked. So that's really all I have to say about all that. Thanks for listening.